Welcome back to Only Talk Sports. We talk sports every single day, or at least we try to. I'm your host, Jeffrey, and subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Hit that notification bell so you never miss another video. Now, in the ACC on Thursday, there's a game between two teams heading in opposite directions, with the struggling Virginia Cavaliers going on the road at the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets, who have been playing better football. Who do I think is going to win this game? Let's break it down. Now, Virginia is 2-4 and 0-3 in the ACC to start this season, and Tony Elliot, who was the offensive coordinator last year at Clemson, is their new head coach, taking over for Bronco Mendenhall, who was their coach last year, but he retired. And so far this season, Virginia has been struggling. They beat Richmond 34-17 in week 1, and that was a good win, but then they followed it up with a 24-3 loss at Illinois, and obviously Illinois is playing a lot better football, but Virginia just could not do anything in this game. Then they beat Old Dominion 16-14, and that, even though they barely won, was still a good win because Old Dominion has beaten Virginia Tech and Coastal Carolina this season. But then they lost at Syracuse 22-20, they lost at Duke 38-17, and they lost to Louisville 34-17. Now, obviously, Syracuse and Duke are both playing much better football than people anticipated coming into the season, but they were not really competitive, especially in the Duke-Louisville games, and Virginia's just struggling to score points, and their defense is not stopping the other team enough to compensate. Now, quarterback Brennan Armstrong in the Louisville game had 313 yards, a touchdown, and 2 interceptions, and a rushing touchdown. And he's a really good quarterback. He led the country in passing yards per game last season, but this season it's just not doing as well. And I don't know if it's all on him. I don't know if it's miscommunication with the offensive coordinator. I don't know if it's having a new coach. But Virginia's offense is not doing as well as it was last year, and they have most of their same players returning. The running backs, none of them had over 10 yards against Louisville, so they can't get the run game going. They have 3 great wide receivers in Katon Thompson, 98 yards, against Louisville wide receiver Dontavian Wicks at 69 yards and a touchdown, and wide receiver Lavelle Davis at 52 yards against Louisville. All 3 are great receivers, but they were all there last year. And again, Virginia's offense last year was much better than it is this year. And on the defensive side of the ball, defensive back Anthony Johnson had 4 tackles and an interception, and defensive back Antonio Clary had 3 tackles and an interception. Both played well, and their defense for Virginia against Louisville was pretty good, but unfortunately, again, it wasn't enough to win the game because their offense is struggling, and their defense, like I said, is not doing enough to win. Now, on the Georgia Tech side, Georgia Tech is 3-3 and 2-1 to start this season, and Brent Key is their interim head coach right now since they fired Jeff Collins. And Georgia Tech was really struggling to start this season. They lost to Clemson on a neutral 41-10, and that game wasn't even close. It was kind of competitive until the second half when one of their best players on defense, got ejected for targeting, and they completely fell apart. Then they beat Western Carolina 35-17, and that was a good win. But then they lost to Ole Miss 42-0 in this game. They couldn't even score a point. And obviously, Ole Miss is one of the best teams in the country, but still, they couldn't even put up a point. And then they lost at UCF 27-10. And this was the game that got Jeff Collins fired because they weren't even competitive against a really good group of 5. And obviously, UCF is a great team for a group of 5. But Georgia Tech, being a Power 5 school, should have been more competitive, and that got Jeff Collins fired. But since they lost that game and they got Brent Key now as the interim head coach, they won 2 in a row. They won at Pittsburgh 26-21, and they beat Duke 23-20 in overtime. So obviously Georgia Tech is playing much better football right now. Quarterback Jeff Sims at 227 yards and 2 touchdowns and 95 rushing yards against Duke. He's a really good dual-threat quarterback, and obviously he is day-to-day. And for the Virginia games, we don't know for sure if he's going to play, but he more likely will play, and he is playing fantastic football. Running back Hassan Hall had 70 yards. He's not Jahmyr Gibbs, but he is a solid running back, and at least Georgia Tech has a rushing attack, unlike Virginia. Wide receiver Nate McCollum had 101 yards and a touchdown, and wide receiver Leo Blackburn had 49 yards and a touchdown. Both are good wide receivers for Georgia Tech, and their passing attack is improving in the last 2 games. And on the defensive side of the ball, defensive back Clayton Powell had 6 tackles, and linebacker Charlie Thomas, who was fantastic, had 5 tackles for Georgia Tech against Duke. And obviously Georgia Tech, like I said, is playing much better football the last couple of weeks with their new interim head coach. So who do I think is going to win this game? This game is at Georgia Tech, and I think that's going to make a difference. And interestingly enough, coming into the season, you probably would feel Virginia was the better team over Georgia Tech, and obviously they still probably have the more talented roster, but they're just not playing good football. Obviously, they were competitive against Syracuse, but in the Illinois, Duke, and Louisville losses, they weren't competitive at all. And Georgia Tech, at the start of the season, was playing terrible, and they weren't doing good at all. But now that Jeff Collins is fired and they got Brent Key as interim head coach, they're playing much better football with the win at Pitt and a win against Duke. So I think that's going to carry over. I think Georgia Tech's going to win again over Virginia 28-24. I think Virginia can win this game if they will play better and play like they can play like they did last year, because Virginia does have a talented offense, but they're just not playing good on offense, and their defense can't do enough for Virginia to win games. And I think Georgia Tech is now energized behind Brent Key at head coach, and I think Georgia Tech is playing much better football the last couple of weeks, and again, I think it's going to carry over again. Their defense is playing well, and their offense is playing better, and I think that Brent Key and Georgia Tech is going to beat Tony Elliot and Virginia 28-24. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Like this video down below. Comment down below whether you think Georgia Tech or Virginia is going to win this game and why, and I will see you next time.